At exactly 0647 hours, November 14, 1944, Lieutenant Commander Robert Mac McAllister was 3 seconds away from blacking out. His F4U Corsair hung inverted at 8,800 feet above Leyte Gulf, engine screaming, the entire aircraft shuddering as he slammed the stick forward into a maneuver no pilot's handbook ever recommended. Negative G forces yanked him upward against his harness straps. Blood rushed to his head. His vision tunneled red at the edges. Below him, or above him now, the Philippine Sea spun in a sickening arc of blue and white. 2 Japanese A6M0s had bracketed him perfectly, one high, one low. A scissor trap. Textbook. They thought they had him. The wind screamed through the canopy seal. His fuel pressure gauge flickered, oil temperature spiking. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine roared like a wounded animal as gravity worked against every mechanical system designed to keep him airborne. Fuel starvation, hydraulic strain, structural stress beyond rated limits. He didn't know it yet, but in the next 90 seconds, he would either become the first naval aviator to survive a combat negative G split S at combat speed, or he would auger straight into the ocean at 400 miles per hour. The Japanese pilots were already rolling in for the kill shot. No one expected him to survive. Not his wingman who'd lost visual contact 30 seconds ago. Not the destroyer crews watching from 8 miles out. Not even McAllister himself. But 36 kills don't come from playing it safe. Robert McAllister wasn't born a soldier. He was born a mechanic's son in Duluth, Minnesota, where winter came early and stayed late, and where the only thing colder than the wind off Lake Superior was the look his father gave him when he announced he wanted to fly instead of fixing engines. His old man ran a small aircraft repair shop at the municipal airfield, single-prop trainers, crop dusters, the occasional wealthy businessman's Beechcraft. Mac grew up with grease under his fingernails and the smell of aviation fuel in his clothes. Other pilots called it the Ensign Eliminator. It killed more American pilots in training than Japanese fighters did in combat. It was fast, heavily armed, and absolutely unforgiving of mistakes. Mac loved it because he understood it. Every rivet, every control surface, every mechanical quirk and aerodynamic peculiarity. While other pilots fought their Corsairs, Mac worked with us. He knew exactly how far he could push the airframe, exactly when the engine would flame out in a split-S, exactly how much abuse the landing gear could survive. That understanding had kept him alive through 36 confirmed kills. Today, it was about to be tested like never before. The Philippine campaign was a slaughterhouse. By November 1944, the Japanese knew they were losing. They knew it in their bones, in their dwindling fuel reserves, in the way their newest pilots arrived with barely 60 hours of flight time. But knowing you're losing and accepting defeat are two different things. The Imperial Japanese Navy had decided that if they couldn't win, they'd make the Americans pay in blood for every mile of ocean, every island, every inch of coastline. Leyte Gulf was where they chose to make their stand. The largest naval battle in history. Over 200,000 men, nearly 300 ships, 4 separate engagements spread across 100,000 square miles of ocean. The Japanese threw everything they had left at the American invasion fleet. Battleships, cruisers, carriers, and hundreds of aircraft flown by pilots who'd been told they were already dead. The skies above Leyte were a killing field. On any given day, Navy fighters from the carriers Essex, Lexington, and Intrepid flew combat air patrol in shifts, protecting the invasion force from kamikaze attacks that came in waves. Formations of 5, 10, sometimes 20 aircraft at once, diving straight into American ships with no intention of pulling up. Some pilots were veterans. Most were kids, barely out of training, strapped into obsolete planes with just enough fuel to reach the target. It didn't matter. Dead was dead, whether the pilot had 1,000 hours or 100. The region was a death trap for American fighters, too. Naval engagements meant no friendly airfields for hundreds of miles. If your engine quit, you ditched in the ocean and prayed a destroyer picked you up before exposure or sharks finished you. If you got separated from your flight, you were alone over hostile waters with Japanese patrol planes hunting for stragglers. Nothing survived here for long without skill, luck, and an aircraft that could outperform anything the enemy had. The Corsair gave Mac the performance. His mechanics' understanding gave him the skill. Luck was the variable he couldn't control. The Japanese held every advantage when it came to numbers.
For every enemy plane Mac shot down, 2 more arrived from bases in Luzon, Mindanao, and Formosa. They owned the airspace over the western approaches. They knew the weather patterns, the blind spots in American radar coverage, the exact altitude where morning fog gave them concealment. In the last 48 hours, the carrier group had lost 9 aircraft, 3 to mechanical failure, 6 to enemy action. 2 pilots recovered, 7 dead or missing. The Japanese were running out of experienced pilots, but they were getting smarter with the ones they had left. New tactics, tighter formations, ambush patterns designed specifically to counter the Corsair's speed advantage. They'd learned that American fighters were faster and more heavily armed, so they stopped trying to dogfight. Instead, they used terrain masking, cloud cover, and coordinated attacks to force American pilots into turning fights, where the lighter, more maneuverable Zero still held the edge.
Mac had seen it work. 3 days ago, he'd watched a skilled Zero pilot bait an overconfident Hellcat into a scissors maneuver at low altitude. The American had more power, more ammunition, more armor. Didn't matter. The Zero could turn inside his radius. It took 45 seconds. The Hellcat went into the water trailing smoke and fire. That was the lesson the Japanese wanted American pilots to learn. Speed won't save you if you get suckered into their fight. This morning at 06:45 hours, Mac had launched from the USS Intrepid on what was supposed to be a routine combat air patrol. 4 Corsairs, standard sweep pattern, 2 hours of fuel, clear skies, good visibility, light winds out of the northeast. Routine lasted 18 minutes. At 07:03, radar picked up an inbound strike package, estimated 12 to 15 aircraft, coming in low from the northwest, using a squall line for cover. Mac's flight was vectored to intercept. They climbed to 12,000 feet, throttles bent forward, hunting for contrails or glints of sunlight off canopies. They found the enemy at 07:18. Not 12 aircraft, 23. A mixed group, Zeros, some older Oscars, and what looked like 2 torpedo bombers trying to sneak through to the carrier group. The fight started clean. Mac's wingman, Lieutenant Jake Hendricks, splashed a Zero in the opening pass. Mac took a second one with a deflection shot that tore the enemy's port wing clean off. The Japanese formation scattered, breaking into pairs and singles, trying to extend away from the heavier, faster American fighters. That's when Mac made his mistake. He went after a fleeing Zero that looked damaged, trailing white smoke, losing altitude. Perfect kill, easy pickings. He tunnel visioned on it, tracking it down through 8,000 feet, lining up the shot. He never saw the 2 Zeros waiting below him in the haze. By the time he realized it was a trap, they'd already boxed him in. The first Zero came from his 7 o'clock high, tracers arcing past his starboard wing like bright orange beads on a string. Max saw them in his peripheral vision, not the aircraft itself, just the tracers. Phosphorus rounds, 7.7 millimeters, moving slower than he was. Close, but not close enough. The Japanese pilot had opened fire too early, probably excited, probably young. Mac didn't panic. He rolled 30 degrees left, chopped throttle, and dropped the nose. Not a hard brake, just enough to spoil the enemy's tracking solution. The Corsair responded instantly. 2,000 horsepower pulling him into a descending left-hand spiral. His airspeed indicator climbed to 310 knots. The stick went heavy in his hands. G-forces pressed him down into his seat. He counted 3 seconds. Rolled wings level. Checked his mirrors. The Zero was still there, pulling lead, trying to cut inside his turn. The second Zero, the one Mac hadn't seen yet, was sliding into position on his right side, 400 yards out, setting up a bracket. Classic trap. One pushes, one pulls. You break away from one, you fly into the other. Mac had seen it before. Twice. Both times the American pilot died. He needed distance, speed, separation. The Corsair's one advantage over the Zero was straight-line performance. Mac's fighter could outrun anything the Japanese had, as long as he didn't get slow. He shoved the throttle full forward, felt the big R2800 engine surge, felt the aircraft accelerate like a kicked horse. The airspeed needle swung through 340 knots. The Corsair vibrated, control surfaces buffeting at the edge of design limits. He pointed the nose at the horizon and ran. Behind him, the Zeros gave chase, but they couldn't match his speed and level flight. The gap widened. 400 yards, 500 yards, 600 yards. For 5 seconds, Mac thought he was clear. Then the third Zero appeared, dead ahead at his 12 o'clock level, 800 yards in closing. Head-on pass. Mac's stomach tightened. The enemy pilot knew what he was doing. This wasn't some rookie. He wasn't breaking off. He wasn't flinching. He was holding his heading, holding his altitude, committed to the merge. At a closing speed of over 600 miles per hour, they'd pass each other in less than 5 seconds. Both pilots would get one chance. Mac steadied his breathing, pulled the gunsight pipper onto the Zero's nose. His right thumb hovered over the trigger on the stick. 6.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 400 rounds per gun, synchronized to converge at 1,000 feet. Distance, 700 yards. The Zero's wings lit up, muzzle flashes. The enemy had opened fire first. Mac saw the tracers, white and orange, streaming toward him. Some went high, some went low. One round punched through his port wing with a metallic crack he felt more than heard. Distance, 500 yards. Mac exhaled slowly, let half his breath out, held it. Distance, 400 yards. He pressed the trigger. The Corsair shuddered. 6 guns roared at once, 3,600 rounds per minute. The entire airframe vibrating with recoil. Spent brass casings tumbled through the slipstream. The smell of cordite flooded the cockpit. Mac kept the pipper centered, adjusting for the target's slight right drift, leading him by 2 mils, trusting his instinct, trusting the ballistics. Distance, 300 yards. He saw his rounds hit. Flashes of white along the Zero's engine cowling, a puff of black smoke. The enemy's propeller disintegrated into metal fragments. The Zero's nose pitched down violently. The aircraft suddenly asymmetric, controllability gone. Distance, 200 yards. Mac broke hard right, pulling 6 Gs, the world graying out at the edges. The Zero flashed past his left side, maybe 50 feet of separation, already tumbling, pilot probably dead or unconscious. Mac rolled wings level, pulled out of the brake, checked his 6. The other 2 Zeros were still there, 1,200 yards back, angling to cut him off. And they weren't giving up. Mac pushed the throttle to the firewall and climbed. The Corsair clawed for altitude, engine howling, manifold pressure redlining. He kept the nose 20 degrees up, trading speed for height, watching his airspeed bleed off. 320 knots, 310 knots, 290 knots. The 2 Zeros followed, but they were slower in the climb. Mac gained separation. 1,400 yards, 1,600 yards, 1,800 yards. At 11,000 feet, he leveled off, let the airspeed build back up. Checked his fuel, half tanks. Enough for another 40 minutes if he was careful. Ammunition counter showed 1,840 rounds remaining across all 6 guns. Plenty. He scanned the sky. The Zeros had split up. One was climbing to his altitude, 2,000 yards out at his 4 o'clock. The other had stayed low, orbiting at 8,000 feet, waiting. They were setting another trap. Mac understood the tactic. The high Zero would push him down into the waiting one. Two-dimensional thinking, vertical separation, use altitude as a weapon. He decided to reverse it. He rolled inverted, pulled the stick back and dove. Not toward the low Zero. That's what they expected. He dove perpendicular to both of them, straight down, full power, letting gravity and 2,000 horsepower accelerate him past 400 knots. The airframe groaned. Wind noise turned into a scream. His altimeter unwound like a broken watch. At 6,000 feet, he pulled out hard. 8 Gs, vision tunneling, blood draining from his head. The horizon swung up.
The Corsair shuddered, protesting, but held together. Mac rolled wings level and looked back. The high Zero had followed him down, but couldn't match his dive speed. He'd gained another 800 yards of separation. The low Zero was now above him, confused, out of position. Mac had split their coordination. He turned hard left, a slicing turn at 380 knots, keeping his energy up, denying them an easy shot. The high Zero tried to follow but couldn't turn tight enough. Mac reversed right, then left again, weaving through the sky like a drunk man walking, never holding a steady heading for more than 3 seconds. The Japanese pilots were good, but they were flying light fighters with limited fuel. Every aggressive maneuver burned gas they couldn't afford. Mac's Corsair had range, endurance. He could keep this up longer than they could. He just had to stay alive long enough. The high Zero made a mistake. He tried to cut across Mac's turn, taking a shortcut, predicting where Mac would be instead of reacting to where he was. Mac saw it coming, chopped throttle, extended his speed brakes, and let the Zero overshoot. For 2 seconds, the Japanese pilot was in front of him, 600 yards out, crossing left to right. Mac rolled 30 degrees, pulled lead, and fired a 3-second burst. The tracers walked across the Zero's fuselage. He saw hits, bright flashes stitching from tail to cockpit. The Zero snap rolled right, trailing smoke, either evading or dying. Mac didn't wait to find out. He extended away, climbing again, rebuilding energy. 1-0 damaged or destroyed, one still hunting him. He searched the sky, found the remaining 0 at his 8 o'clock low, 1,200 yards, climbing toward him with patience. This pilot wasn't rushing, wasn't making mistakes. He was staying defensive, keeping his energy up, waiting for Mac to get slow or careless. Professional. Mac respected that, also hated it. He continued his climb to 13,000 feet, leveled off, throttled back to conserve fuel. His engine temperature gauge was creeping into the yellow. Oil pressure still good. Hydraulics normal. The Corsair was holding together, but he'd been running at combat power for nearly 8 minutes straight. Metal fatigues, seals wear, systems fail. The 0 followed him up, maintaining separation, mirroring his turns. Neither pilot firing, neither closing. A waiting game. Mac glanced at his fuel gauge again. 35 minutes left. The carrier was 80 miles southeast. If he broke off now and ran for home, the 0 might let him go. Might. But there were still Japanese aircraft out here hunting for his carrier group. Letting this one go meant letting him report Mac's heading, altitude, and fuel state. Meant giving away American positions. Meant other pilots would die. Mac couldn't accept that. He needed to bait this guy into making a move. He rolled inverted again, pulled into another split S, dove back toward the ocean. The 0 followed, cautious, maintaining distance. At 4,000 feet, Mac leveled off, heading east, toward the carrier, deliberately predictable, showing the enemy pilot his intentions. The 0 took the bait. He nosed down, gaining speed, closing the gap. 1,000 yards, 900, 800. Mac waited, watched his mirrors, let the enemy commit. At 700 yards, the 0 opened fire. Mac saw the tracers, broke hard right, pulled 6 Gs, reversed left. The 0 tried to follow but overshot again, crossing in front of Mac's nose at 400 yards. Mac fired. A 2-second burst. His rounds tore through the 0's wing root. The enemy aircraft rolled violently, aileron control gone, spiraling toward the water. Mac didn't watch it hit.
He climbed again, scanning for threats. The sky was empty. He keyed his radio. Viper lead to Viper 3. Status. Static. Then Jake Hendrick's voice, strained. 3 is defensive. 2 bandits on me. Grid Victor 7. Mac checked his position. He was 12 miles from Jake's last known location. Fuel state, 28 minutes. Ammunition, 1,520 rounds. He turned west, throttle forward, pushing the Corsair back toward the fight. He found Jake 3 minutes later, 9,000 feet over open water, locked in a turning fight with 2 Zeros. Jake's Corsair was smoking from the engine cowling, coolant leak or oil fire. Mac couldn't tell from this distance. The Zeros were taking turns pressing him, one high, one low, forcing Jake to constantly reverse his turn, bleeding energy with every maneuver. Mac dove in from the 6 o'clock, undetected. He selected the high one, pulled lead, fired from 800 yards. Too far for accuracy, but close enough to scare them. His tracers cut through the air between both Zeros. They broke immediately, abandoning their attack on Jake, splitting in opposite directions. "Break left and extend," Mac radioed to Jake. "I've got these too." Jake's Corsair rolled wings level, nose down, and accelerated east. Smart. Get out of the fight, get back to the carrier before that engine quit completely. Mac was alone again with 2 more Zeros. But these pilots were different, younger, more aggressive. They didn't set traps or wait for mistakes. They came straight at him, both at once, from different angles, committing to a head-on merge with no hesitation. Kamikaze energy, even if they weren't officially kamikaze pilots. Mac realized he had maybe 10 seconds to decide, run or fight. His fuel gauge showed 22 minutes. The carrier was 75 miles away. If he ran now, he'd make it home with fumes in the tanks. If he fought, he might not make it home at all. He looked at the 2 Zeros closing on him, thought about the 23 aircraft strike package that had jumped them earlier.
Thought about how many of those enemy planes were still out here, still hunting for American ships, still carrying bombs or torpedoes meant for carriers full of sailors who had no way to defend themselves except pilots like him. Mac nudged the stick forward, pointed his nose at the nearest zero and pressed the trigger. The decision was made. The zeros came at him from his 11 and 1 o'clock, converging, trying to create a crossfire where he'd have to evade one and fly into the other. Mac held his heading, fired at the left one, forced it to break early. The right one held steady, firing, committed to the merge. At 300 yards, Mac snap-rolled 90 degrees, pulled vertical. The zero flashed beneath him. So close Mac could see the red meatball on its fuselage. He rolled inverted at the top of his climb, pulled through, came down on the zero 6 o'clock. The Japanese pilot saw him coming, broke hard right. Mac followed, pulling lead, firing, missed. The zero reversed left. Mac followed again, tighter turn, higher G-forces, his vision narrowing. The Corsair buffeted, stall warning shaking through the airframe. He was at the edge of control, one wrong input away from a spin. He eased off the stick, let the nose drop, regained airspeed. The zero extended away, 1,200 yards now, heading for a cloud bank on the horizon. The second zero was above him, rolling in for another attack. Mac broke left, hard, pulling 8 Gs. The world went gray, his G-suit inflated, squeezing his legs, keeping blood in his brain. The zero's tracers passed behind him, missing by 100 feet. He reversed right, then left again, defensive maneuvering, buying time. His engine temperature was in the red now, oil pressure dropping. 5 more minutes at combat power and the engine would seize. He needed to end this. The first zero came back out of the cloud bank, angling for another head-on pass. The second zero was repositioning above him, trying to get behind him again. They were coordinating better now, learning his patterns, adapting. Mac pulled into a climbing right-hand spiral, gaining altitude, forcing them to follow. At 14,000 feet, his engine coughed. Fuel starvation. He was flying too nose high, gravity pulling fuel away from the pickup lines. He leveled off immediately, engine smoothed out, close call. Too close. He checked his fuel gauge. 14 minutes left. Not enough to keep fighting, barely enough to get home. He had to break contact. Now. He rolled inverted, pulled into a split S, dove toward the ocean, full power, building speed. The zeros followed. At 2,000 feet, he pulled out, stayed low, 50 feet above the wave tops, using ground effect to gain a few extra knots of airspeed. The Corsair topped out at 412 knots, 30 feet over the water, spray kicking up from the prop wash. The zeros couldn't match that speed. The gap widened. 1,400 yards, 1,800, 2,200. Mac was pulling away. Then his engine coughed again. The engine didn't just cough, it stuttered, a deep mechanical hiccup that sent a shudder through the entire airframe. Mac's eyes snapped to the instrument panel, oil pressure dropping. 28 psi, 25, 22, coolant temperature spiking, past redline, into zones the gauge wasn't designed to measure. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 had taken damage. Somewhere in those last 15 minutes of combat, a stray round, metal fatigue, a severed oil line, something critical had failed. The engine was bleeding out, cooking itself from the inside. Mac had maybe 3 minutes before it seized completely. His stomach dropped. He was 70 miles from the carrier, 50 feet above open ocean, flying at 410 knots with 2 zeros still closing behind him, now only 1,600 yards back, and gaining because his engine was losing power. The math was simple and brutal. He couldn't outrun them anymore, couldn't dogfight with a dying engine, couldn't ditch successfully at this speed. He had no good options. The oil pressure gauge hit 15 psi. The engine began to knock, a rhythmic hammering that meant bearing failure, metal grinding on metal, pistons starting to seize. Every second of operation was destroying components that couldn't be replaced out here. Mac throttled back slightly, trying to baby the engine, reduce the load. His airspeed bled off. 390 knots, 370, 350. The zeros closed to 1,200 yards. He glanced at his altimeter. 50 feet. At this altitude, he had no room for error, no space to dive or maneuver. The ocean was right there, gray-green, and utterly unforgiving, wave tops close enough to touch. If he climbed to gain maneuvering room, the engine would overheat faster. If he stayed low, the zeros would close to firing range within 60 seconds. His right hand hovered over the radio switch. He could call for help. There were other Corsairs out here somewhere, other flights on patrol. But by the time they arrived, he'd either be dead or in the water. The engine knocked harder, louder, oil pressure at 10 psi. Smoke began streaming from the cowling, black, thick, pooling against the windscreen before ripping away in the slipstream. This was bad, really bad. Behind him, the lead Zero opened fire at 900 yards, a speculative burst, hoping to get lucky.
Mac saw the tracers in his mirrors, bright orange streaks that fell short by 300 feet. But the next burst wouldn't miss. He had maybe 45 seconds before they were in lethal range. His mind raced through options, discarding them as fast as they appeared. Ditch now, lose the aircraft, probably survive if the rescue destroyer could reach him before the Zeros strafed him in the water. Keep running. Maybe the engine would hold together long enough to reach friendly ships. Turn and fight. Suicide with a failing engine. None of them were good. Then, he remembered something his father had told him, years ago, working on a damaged Stearman that had thrown a rod. When the engine quits, son, gravity's the only power you've got left. Use it smart. Mac looked at his altimeter again. 50 feet. Looked at his airspeed. 340 knots. Looked at the Zeros in his mirrors. 800 yards in closing. And then he looked up. At 80,800 feet of empty sky above him. An insane idea crystallized in his mind. The kind of idea that made perfect sense in the moment and would seem like madness 30 seconds later. If he couldn't outrun them and couldn't outfight them, maybe he could outfall them. Mac pulled back on the stick and climbed. Mac pulled vertical, trading every ounce of airspeed for altitude. The Corsair clawed skyward, nose pointed straight up, engine screaming its death rattle. His airspeed bled off fast, 340 knots, 300, 250, 200. The climb rate was incredible. The engine was dying, but it wasn't dead yet, and 2,000 horsepower still meant something even when half the cylinders were misfiring. The Zeros followed. They thought he was panicking, running vertical with no plan. Classic rookie mistake, trading speed for altitude with no energy to recover. They were wrong. At 6,000 feet, his airspeed hit 120 knots. The stick went mushy. Stall warning shaking through the airframe. At 8,000 feet, he was down to 80 knots. The Corsair was wallowing, barely flying, hanging on the edge of falling out of the sky. At 80,800 feet, Mac stopped climbing, not because he wanted to, because the aircraft physically couldn't go any higher. For one perfect second, the Corsair hung motionless in the air, balanced on nothing, every surface stalled, the engine hammering like a dying heartbeat. The Zeros were 2,000 feet below him, pulling up hard, guns tracking, waiting for him to fall into their sights. Mac didn't fall. He rolled inverted. One smooth motion, stick left, full left rudder. The Corsair pivoting around its center of gravity, flipping upside down. The horizon spun. The ocean appeared above him, the sky below. Then he shoved the stick forward, full forward, as hard as he could push it. Every pilot's nightmare. Negative G-forces, the kind that killed you in peacetime, the kind that tore wings off aircraft, the kind that made fuel pumps fail and engines quit and oil flow backward through systems never designed for it. The Corsair didn't fall. It dove, straight down, inverted, accelerating. Negative 3 Gs slammed him upward against his harness. Blood rushed to his head. His vision went red. His helmet pressed into the canopy rail. Loose objects, maps, pencils, spent shell casings floated upward into his face. The engine quit. Complete silence except for the wind scream. His propeller windmilled uselessly, no power, just drag. His hydraulic pressure dropped to 0. His electrical systems flickered. Every gauge on the panel went haywire, as fluids and fuel flowed in directions they were never meant to. But gravity didn't care about any of that. The Corsair accelerated.
150 knots, 200, 250, 300, straight down, inverted, howling toward the ocean at terminal velocity. The Zeros tried to follow. They rolled. They dove, but they couldn't match his vertical speed. The Corsair weighed 14,000 pounds. The Zeros weighed 6,000. Physics didn't negotiate. Mass times gravity meant Mac fell faster, harder, steeper. He passed through their altitude doing 350 knots. Went right between them. So close he saw the lead pilot's face through the canopy. Eyes wide, startled, watching this crazy American scream past inverted with a dead engine. Mac kept diving. 4,000 feet, 380 knots. 3,000 feet, 410 knots. 2,000 feet, 430 knots and accelerating. The ocean filled his entire vision. Gray-green water rushing up at him at 7 miles per minute. His windscreen vibrated. The airframe groaned. Control surfaces buffeted at the edge of flutter. Structural loads approaching ultimate limits. At 1,200 feet, Mac yanked the stick back. Not gradually, not carefully, hard. Emergency pull. Every muscle in his arm straining against the forces. The Corsair began to roll upright. Slowly. Too slowly. 900 feet. His vision tunneled. Positive 8 Gs. Blood draining from his head. Gray creeping in from the edges. 600 feet. The horizon appeared at the bottom of his windscreen, then rotated up. Wings coming level. Nose rising. 400 feet. The ocean was right there. Close enough to see individual wave crests. Close enough to smell salt spray. 200 feet. The Corsair shuddered. Pulled out. Leveled off at 120 feet, doing 340 knots with a dead engine. And no hydraulics. Mac was conscious. Barely. He looked back. 1-0 had pulled out behind him, 2,000 feet back. The other was still diving, out of control. Pilot blacked out or dead, the aircraft tumbling toward the water in a flat spin. It hit the ocean at 450 knots. Disintegrated. Gone. The remaining Zero pilot saw it happen, saw his wingmen die, saw this insane American recover from a maneuver that should have killed him. The Zero broke off, turned north, ran. Mac didn't chase him. He was gliding. Dead stick. No power. No hydraulics. Just momentum and control surfaces and whatever luck he had left. 68 miles from the carrier. No engine, no radio power, no way home except forward. Mac tried the starter. Nothing. The engine didn't even cough. Just dead weight hanging off the front of the airframe. 2,000 pounds of steel and aluminum dragging him toward the ocean. He was gliding at 180 knots, losing 50 feet of altitude per minute. At this rate, he had maybe 2 minutes before he'd be swimming. His hydraulic pressure gauge read 0. That meant no flaps, no landing gear extension, no trim control. The Corsair was a 13,000-pound glider with the aerodynamic efficiency of a brick. He scanned the horizon. Nothing but ocean. No ships, no islands, no friendly aircraft. He was alone. His altimeter unwound slowly. 100 feet. 90. 80. Mac's right hand stayed on the stick, making tiny corrections, keeping the wings level, the nose at exactly the right angle to stretch his glide as far as possible. Every degree mattered now. 2 nose high and he'd stall. 2 nose low and he'd accelerate into the water. 70 feet. He thought about ditching procedure. Canopy open, harness loose, shallow angle of impact, pray the aircraft didn't flip. The water temperature was maybe 75 degrees. He could survive exposure for hours if he had to. If the sharks didn't find him first. 60 feet. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement at his 2 o'clock high. Maybe 8 miles out. Something small and dark against the cloud layer. Mac's throat tightened. Another aircraft. He watched it.
Tried to identify it. The angle was wrong, distance too far, his vision still recovering from the G-forces, but the way it moved, slow, patient, stalking, told him everything he needed to know. It wasn't American. Someone had been watching his entire fight, watching him kill 3 Zeros, watching him survive the split sea, watching him glide toward the water with a dead engine, waiting for the perfect moment. Mac had no power, no hydraulics, no way to maneuver. He was 50 feet above the ocean, barely flying, an easy kill for anyone with ammunition left. The aircraft began a lazy turn toward him. Mac's mind went cold, analytical, mechanic's brain taking over. He had no engine, but he had control surfaces. Ailerons, elevator, rudder, all cable-driven, no hydraulics needed. He had airspeed, he had mass, he had momentum, and he had one gun position that didn't need hydraulic pressure to fire. The outboard starboard gun. Manual trigger, direct mechanical linkage. Mac reached down to the auxiliary firing panel, found the selector switch, rotated it to single gun STBD outer. His ammunition counter for that gun showed 180 rounds remaining. Not much, but more than zero. The enemy aircraft closed to 6 miles. Mac could see it clearly now. Another zero. Looked fresh, no visible damage, flying smooth, controlled. This pilot hadn't been in the earlier fight. He'd been orbiting at high altitude, watching, learning Mac's tactics, waiting for exhaustion or mechanical failure to do the work for him. Professional, patient, smart. Max altitude, 40 feet. The Zero began a slow descent, positioning himself 2,000 yards behind Mac's 6 o'clock, matching Mac's speed, taking his time. No rush, no wasted ammunition. He'd get one perfect shot, and that would be enough. Mac kept gliding, kept bleeding altitude, 35 feet, 30. He couldn't turn without losing more height, couldn't climb, couldn't run. All he could do was fly straight and wait for the Zero to close. The Japanese pilot knew it too. He took his time, dropped to 500 feet above Mac, then 400, then 300, staying high, staying safe, keeping all the options. 1,500 yards. Mac's hands were steady on the stick. His breathing was slow. His mind was clear. He'd been here before. Not exactly here, but close enough. 36 kills don't come from luck. They come from understanding that every aircraft has a moment of vulnerability. Every pilot has a pattern. Every attack has a window where the geometry flips. You just had to see it. 1,000 yards. The Zero descended to 200 feet above Mac, matching his speed exactly, 190 knots. The perfect stocking position. High enough to dive for speed if needed, low enough to track Mac visually, far enough back to react if Mac tried anything desperate. 800 yards. Mac watched his altimeter. 25 feet. The wave tops were close enough to touch. Salt spray misted his windscreen. One wrong input and he'd cartwheel into the ocean. The Zero closed to 600 yards. Mac could see the pilot now, just a silhouette through the canopy. Head tracking, gun sight on target, finger probably already on the trigger. 400 yards. Mac waited. The Zero's nose dipped slightly, the pilot adjusting his aim, compensating for the downward angle, lining up the killing shot. 300 yards. Mac's thumb rested on the trigger. The Zero fired, a long burst. Mac saw the muzzle flashes, saw the tracers streaming toward him. Some went high, some went wide. One round punched through his vertical stabilizer with a metallic crack. Mac didn't flinch. He chopped throttle, a useless gesture with a dead engine, but the motion was instinct.
Then he kicked full right rudder, slammed the stick left, and snap-rolled the Corsair 90 degrees. The world tilted. The ocean appeared on his left, the sky on his right. He was flying sideways, 50 feet of altitude, 180 knots. The Corsair balanced on an ice edge between flying and falling. The Zero pilot reacted instantly. He rolled to follow, trying to keep Mac in his sights. That was the mistake. Mac held the roll for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for the Zero to commit, long enough for the geometry to shift, then he reversed. Full left rudder, stick right. The Corsair rolled back wings level. The Zero, still rolling, overshot. For half a second, he crossed in front of Mac's nose, 200 yards out, silhouetted, perfectly framed. Mac fired, his single gun hammered. 180 rounds, 3 seconds of trigger time, 50 caliber armor-piercing incendiaries walking across the Zero's fuselage from tail to engine. He saw hits, bright flashes, metal peeling. The Zero's canopy shattered, smoke erupted from the engine cowling. The Zero snap-rolled left, trailing fire. Pilot either dead or dying. It hit the water 5 seconds later. No parachute, no bailout. Just impact and spray and silence. Mac rolled wings level. His altimeter read 20 feet. The sky was empty. He was alone again, still gliding, still 60 miles from home. Mac's altimeter read 15 feet when he saw the destroyer. It was 8 miles out, cutting through the water at maybe 20 knots, heading northeast, away from him. American, Fletcher class probably. Gray hull, white wake, radar masts spinning lazy circles against the sky. His throat went dry. That ship was his only chance. If it turned away, if it didn't see him, he'd be in the water in 90 seconds with nobody knowing where he was. He had no radio, no flares, no way to signal except... Mac looked at his single remaining gun. Empty. He'd fired every round into that last Zero. He scanned his cockpit, emergency supplies, his Mae West life vest, a signal mirror and the survival kit, a dye marker, all useless until he was already in the water. 10 feet of altitude. The destroyer was pulling away. 7.5 miles now. 7 3/4. Mac made a decision. He was gliding at 170 knots. The destroyer was doing maybe 23 knots. If he could maintain his glide path, if he could stretch every foot of altitude, if the wind cooperated and his calculations were perfect, he might be able to overfly the ship close enough for them to see him. It was insane, but it was the only option he had. He eased the nose down slightly, trading height for distance. His airspeed crept up to 175 knots. The Corsair's glide ratio improved marginally, still terrible, but every bit mattered. 5 feet of altitude. The wave tops were right there. Individual swells rose higher than his wings. Salt spray covered his windscreen. One rogue wave and he'd catch a wing, cartwheel gone. 4 miles to the destroyer. Mac held the stick with surgical precision. Tiny corrections, micro-adjustments, his father's voice in his head. Feel the aircraft. Listen to it. It'll tell you what it needs. The Corsair needed altitude it didn't have, and an engine that wouldn't start. 3 miles. His altimeter hit 0. He was in ground effect now, flying in the cushion of compressed air between his wings and the ocean surface. It gave him maybe an extra 30 seconds of glide time.
Maybe. 2 miles. The destroyer was turning, not toward him, just a course correction, coming about to a new heading. The range opened again. 2.25 miles. 2.5. Mac's jaw clenched. 1 mile. He could see details now. Sailors on deck. Gun mounts. The American flag snapping from the fantail. Someone on the bridge wing with binoculars. 1/2 mile. Mac flew directly over the destroyer's starboard side at 8 feet of altitude, doing 160 knots. Someone on deck pointed. Another sailor ran aft. The 5-inch guns tracked him, a reflex, checking if he was hostile, then elevated away when they saw the American markings. Mac held his glide for another 10 seconds. Then his left wing caught a wave crest. The Corsair snap-rolled left. Mac corrected instinctively, but without power, without hydraulics, the aircraft was done flying. The nose dropped, the right wing dipped, the ocean rushed up. He had maybe 2 seconds. Mac yanked the canopy release. The plexiglass blew away in the slipstream. Wind hit him like a fist. He reached for his harness buckle, twisted, released. The Corsair hit the water at 140 knots. The impact was immediate and total. Deceleration from 140 knots to 0 in less than half a second. Mac's body slammed forward against the instrument panel despite his harness being loose. His head snapped down. His vision exploded white. Water flooded the cockpit. The Corsair's nose buried itself in the ocean. The tail rose vertically. For 2 seconds, the entire aircraft stood on its nose like a monument. Then it rolled inverted and began to sink. Mac was underwater, disoriented, cold. Salt water in his mouth, his nose, his eyes. He kicked, found the canopy opening, pulled himself through. His Mae West inflated automatically, yanking him toward the surface. He broke into air, gasping, choking, coughing up seawater. The Corsair was gone, already sinking. Nothing left but bubbles and an oil slick. Mac floated on his back, breathing hard, watching the sky spin. Then he heard an engine. Not an aircraft engine, a boat engine. He turned his head. A motor whaleboat from the destroyer was cutting through the water toward him, bow wave white and high, helmsman standing at the wheel, 2 sailors in the bow with boat hooks. They reached him 40 seconds later. Strong hands grabbed his vest, his arms, his flight suit. They hauled him into the boat like a dead fish, dropped him on the deck boards. One of the sailors, a kid, couldn't have been more than 19, knelt beside him. "You okay, sir?" Mac coughed up more water, nodded. His voice came out as a rasp. "Yeah, I'm okay." The sailor grinned. "Hell of a way to ditch, Commander. We thought you were going to put it down right on our deck." Mac closed his eyes, let his head rest against the deck. His entire body ached. His ears rang. His hands were shaking. "What ship?" he managed. "USS Heermann, sir. You just scared the hell out of Captain Hathaway." Mac almost laughed. Almost. "Tell him I'm sorry." The whaleboat turned back toward the destroyer, engine growling, spray kicking up. Mac lay on the deck and watched the clouds pass overhead. He'd survived. 37 kills now, if anyone believed him. He closed his eyes and let the exhaustion take him. They lifted Mac aboard the Heermann on a stretcher, even though he insisted he could walk. A courseman checked him over on the fantail, pupils, reflexes, blood pressure. No broken bones, no concussion, minor bruising across his chest from the harness. A cut on his forehead he hadn't even noticed.
The corpsman dabbed it with iodine, slapped on a bandage, and pronounced him fit for duty. Mac sat on an ammunition locker, still dripping seawater, watching the sun break through the cloud cover to the east. His flight suit clung to him like a second skin. His boots squelched when he moved. Someone brought him hot coffee in a metal cup. He wrapped both hands around it, trying to stop the shaking. It didn't help. The shaking wasn't from cold. Captain Hathaway appeared, a compact man in his 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked Mac over, then glanced at the oil slick still visible off the starboard quarter where the Corsair had gone down. "Hell of a landing, Commander." "Wasn't much of a choice, sir. We counted 4 separate aircraft in the water on our radar plot, all Japanese." "You do all that?" Mac nodded, sipped his coffee. It was terrible, thick, bitter, overboiled, but it was hot and real, and it meant he was alive. 5, Max said quietly. "Got one earlier, before you picked up the track." Hathaway's eyebrows went up. 5 zeros? In one sortie? "Yes, sir." "With a failing engine?" "For part of it, yes, sir." The captain studied him for a long moment. "You're McAllister, the one they call Grease Monkey?" Mac almost smiled. "Yes, sir, that's me." "How many kills does that put you at?" 37 confirmed, sir." Hathaway shook his head slowly, like he was watching something he couldn't quite believe. "My exec saw that split S you pulled. Said it was the goddamnedest thing he's ever seen. Said you were inverted, dead stick, damn near vertical. He thought you were finished." "So did I, sir." "What the hell made you think you could pull out of that?" Mac looked down at his coffee, thought about his father's shop in Duluth, thought about all those years crawling over engines, learning stress loads, understanding what metal could take before it failed. Thought about knowing his aircraft better than the engineers who built it. "I knew what the airframe could handle, sir. I knew it would take the G-loading if I pulled at the right altitude, and I knew the Zeros couldn't follow me through it." "You knew," Hathaway repeated. "That's a hell of a thing to bet your life on." "Yes, sir, it is." The captain pulled out a pack of Chesterfields, offered one to Mac. Mac took it. Hathaway lit them both with a Zippo, then stood there smoking, watching the horizon. "We're heading back to the task force," Hathaway said. "We'll get you transferred back to the Intrepid. Your CO is going to want to debrief you." "Yes, sir." "You should know, your wingman made it back, Lieutenant Hendricks, landed on fumes with that shot-up engine. He reported you as MIA, thought you were dead." Mac exhaled smoke, felt something tight in his chest loosen. "Glad he made it. He'll be glad you did too." They stood in silence for a moment. Below them, sailors went about their duties, swabbing decks, checking depth charge racks, manning the 40mm mounts. The war kept moving. They didn't stop for anyone. Mac finished his cigarette, dropped it, crushed it under his boot. His hands had finally stopped shaking. "Permission to inspect the motor whaleboat crew that pulled me out, sir. I'd like to thank them." Hathaway nodded. "Permission granted. They're forward, port side." Mac found them 15 minutes later. 3 sailors, still in wet dungarees, coiling lines and securing the boat davits. The youngest one, the kid who'd asked if he was okay, snapped to attention when he saw Mac approaching.
"As you were," Max said. They relaxed slightly, but kept watching him with that mix of curiosity and awe that made Mac uncomfortable. He was just a pilot, just a guy who'd gotten lucky more times than he'd gotten unlucky. "I wanted to thank you," Max said, "for pulling me out. Fast work." The helmsman, an older sailor with a weathered face, shrugged. "Just doing our job, sir. But hell, that was some flying. We watched the whole thing. Never seen anything like it." "You gotta tell us what happened?" the kid asked. "The whole story?" Mac looked at him, thought about lying, about playing it down, about saying it was just another patrol. But these men had risked their lives to pull him from the water. They deserved the truth. "Maybe later," Max said, "after I figure out how to explain it to my CO without him thinking I'm crazy." They laughed at that. Good sailors' laughter, the kind that came from understanding that war made everyone a little crazy, and the only difference was who admitted it. Max shook each of their hands, then made his way back aft. The Heermann had increased speed, cutting through the swells at 28 knots, white water peeling back from her bow. The task force was 40 miles southeast. They'd rendezvous in less than 2 hours. Max stood at the rail and watched the ocean pass beneath him. Somewhere down there,
5,000 feet deep in water so cold and dark nothing could survive, his Corsair was settling into the silt. The aircraft that had kept him alive through 37 kills. The machine he'd known better than anything else in his life. Gone. But he was alive. He'd lost the aircraft, but he'd won the fight. That was the trade. That was always the trade. Mac turned away from the rail and went below to find dry clothes and a place to sleep. His body ached, his head throbbed, his ears still rang from the engine noise, the gunfire, the impact. But he'd be flying again in 3 days. Because the war wasn't over, and men like him, mechanics' sons who understood machines, who knew their limits and pushed them anyway, who turned odd skills into lifelines, they were needed, until the day they weren't. What Robert McAllister did that day changed more than just his kill count. When he returned to the Intrepid and filed his after-action report, the intelligence officers didn't believe him at first. 5 kills in 1 sortie. A negative G split-S at combat speed with a dying engine. A dead-stick glide across 60 miles of open ocean followed by a precision ditching within visual range of a destroyer. It sounded like fiction, like propaganda, like the kind of story someone invented to sell war bonds. Then Lieutenant Hendricks corroborated the first half. The Heermann's radar logs confirmed the aircraft positions. The ship's executive officer testified to watching the split-S with binoculars. 3 different sailors gave statements about the ditching. The Navy couldn't ignore it. Within a week, McAllister's tactical innovation, using negative G maneuvers to break enemy pursuit in desperate situations, was classified, analyzed, and added to advanced fighter tactics training. Not as a recommended maneuver, as a last resort option, something to file away in the back of your mind for the moment when all conventional options had failed and dying seemed certain. The split-S had existed for decades. Every pilot knew it, but nobody had thought to fly it inverted with a dead engine at terminal velocity while being chased by enemy fighters. Nobody had believed the airframe could survive the stress loads.
Nobody except a mechanic's son from Minnesota who understood exactly how much punishment his aircraft could take. McAllister flew 23 more combat missions before the war ended in August 1945. He added 6 more confirmed kills to his record, 43 total, the 9th highest scoring Navy ace of the Pacific War. But it wasn't a kill count that earned him the Navy Cross. It was the willingness to innovate under impossible pressure, to understand his machine so completely that he could push it beyond its rated limits and bring it back, to turn mechanical knowledge into tactical advantage. After the war, McAllister did what most combat pilots did. He went home, back to Duluth, back to the cold winds off Lake Superior. His father's repair shop was still there, smaller than he remembered, older, showing the wear of wartime neglect. His father didn't ask many questions about the war, didn't push for stories, just handed him a wrench one morning and said, "Got a Cessna in the hangar with a magneto problem. You remember how to fix one?" Mac did. He worked in that shop for 3 years, fixed engines, trained new mechanics. Never talked about the 37 kills or the split-S or the day he glided 60 miles with a dead engine. The locals knew he'd been a pilot. A few knew he'd been decorated. But nobody knew the details, and Mac preferred it that way. In 1948, the Navy called him back, not to fly, to teach. The Advanced Fighter Weapons School at Naval Air Station Miramar needed instructors who understood both the mechanical and tactical aspects of air combat. McAllister fit the profile perfectly. He spent the next 12 years teaching young pilots the same lesson his father had taught him. Understand your machine, know its limits, respect them, and when the moment comes, when your life depends on it, know exactly how far you can push beyond those limits without breaking. The negative G split-S he'd pioneered became a standard lesson in the curriculum, not as a maneuver to attempt, but as a case study in understanding aircraft performance envelopes. Modern fighter pilots still learn about it, still study the physics, still shake their heads in disbelief that someone survived it. McAllister rarely spoke about November 14, 1944. When pressed, he'd say it was luck, wrong place, wrong time, bad decisions that somehow worked out. He deflected credit, downplayed the skill, insisted any pilot with his background would have done the same thing. But the men who flew with him knew better. They'd seen him nurse damaged aircraft back to carriers when other pilots would have bailed out. They'd watched him diagnose mechanical problems in flight by sound and vibration alone. They'd learned that when Mac said an aircraft could handle something, it could handle it.
because he'd done the math, understood the engineering, and knew the margins better than anyone. He retired from the Navy in 1960 with the rank of commander, moved back to Minnesota, married a schoolteacher named Ellen, had 2 daughters, ran his father's shop until his father passed in 1967, then sold it and spent his retirement restoring vintage aircraft, Corsairs mostly, when he could find them. He died in 1994 at 73 of a heart attack while working on a P-51 Mustang in his garage. Quick, quiet, surrounded by the machines he'd spent his life understanding. The Navy sent representatives to his funeral. Old squadron mates, former students, men who'd learned from him, flown with him, survived because of lessons he'd taught them. They told stories, shared memories, talked about the day a mechanic's son from Minnesota proved that knowing your aircraft could mean the difference between dying and making history.
Modern naval aviators still study McAllister's engagement. The tactics, the decision-making under pressure, the mechanical understanding that allowed him to attempt a maneuver that should have killed him. Fighter weapons schools use it as a case study in situational awareness and systems knowledge. But more than that, they use it to teach something harder to quantify: the value of odd skills turned into tactical advantages. The importance of understanding not just how to fly, but what you're flying. The difference between being a pilot and being someone who truly knows their machine. McAllister never thought of himself as extraordinary. In interviews late in life, he always said the same thing: "I was just a mechanic who learned to fly. The rest was just not panicking when things went wrong." But history remembered differently. History remembered a pilot who killed 5 enemy aircraft in one sortie with a failing engine, who survived a maneuver that broke every rule in the book, who glided 60 miles on nothing but skill and understanding, who taught generations of pilots that knowing your machine could save your life. History remembered Robert Mac McAllister not as the best pilot of his generation, but as proof that sometimes the best pilots aren't the ones with the most natural talent. They're the ones who understand their aircraft so completely that they can make the impossible look routine. 37 kills in the air, but thousands of lives saved on the ground through the lessons he taught. That was his real legacy. That was what mattered.